Hello, and welcome to week 2 of English 200 and 201. This week, we're going to continue to work on poetry. We'll talk about using images in creative writing, how to show and not tell, how to use sensory images, the density and doubleness of words. We'll talk a lot about figurative language, and then I'm going to go into some information on the sonnet, the pantoum, and the prose poem. Those are 3 different formal poems, formal types of poetry to write in poetry. The discussion this week will actually be a warm-up writing exercise. Then you'll do 3 assignments in your writing journal. The first one is you're going to write a sonnet. The second one is you're going to write a pantoum. And the third one is you're going to write a prose poem. Finally, you're going to revise one of those writing exercises into a formal assignment. And when I say revise, I mean significantly revise between the writing exercise and the final assignment. Those of you in English 201, you will have an extra discussion forum that I will talk about at the end of this lecture. Readings this week: continue to read about writing poetry, images, symbols, and figurative language, pages 41 through 48, poetic forms, the sonnet, the pantoum, and the prose poem. And you're going to need to read through an anthology of poems in order to participate in the discussion forum. So let's talk a little bit about what I mean by the word show, don't tell. You'll hear that a lot in creative writing classes, and what it means is to use all of these tools in order to make concrete sensory images in your writing. When you write in the abstract in your writing, or when you write generally in your writing is so much less powerful. The reader can't feel and see what you're writing about. What you need to use are sensory details. You need to be as specific as possible, and you need to use words that have the ability to give greater meaning. That can be done a lot using figurative language. So today we're going to be talking about how to do this in your writing. First thing I want you to think about is using sensory infused images. The sensory infused images help the reader enter the world of your writing. They actually activate your limbic system, creating a physical response. So if your reader is reading about a sensory experience in your poem and you've done it right, you'll actually feel what they're talking about. Abstractions do not convey the specificity of the situation. And what's really ironic is that the more specific your writing is, the more powerful it will be. Passive verbs, linking verbs, all forms of the verb to be do little to illuminate the language. One thing I'd like you to try is to really try to practice writing sensory description. So don't just sit here passively listening to me, because I'm going to go on for a while in these lectures because I'm packing in a lot in these in each week when we do this in the summer. So while I'm talking, have a piece of paper out, and you might want to pause this right now so you can go get a piece of paper and a pen, but have a piece of paper out and a pen so that you can try these writing exercises. These aren't your writing exercises you're going to be doing in your journal. This is just for you to really connect with what I'm talking about. So if we were in class, you'd just be working on this while you wouldn't be turning this in. So start by writing down a word, like I'm choosing eucalyptus tree because there's one right outside my window. Now think about that tree and try to describe it using your 5 senses. So you're going to think about whatever you've decided to think about. Here's my attempt. Sight: bark that is red and raw, wet with the dew of dawn, thin fingers reaching back to the earth, leaves alert as antennae. Smell: sharp as high winds, medicinal, like a hot bath, a cavern of calm water. Taste: dusty and long-traveled, the belly of old ships, the desperation of farmers. Touch: bark that can be smooth as glass or rough as a deep sea strong. Sound: the cry of winds, the whisper of leaves. You'll notice when I'm describing this tree and I'm talking about its taste, I did not actually go out and taste the eucalyptus tree. okay? You are not expected to do that. You are to imagine what it tastes like. Describe its taste in a way that is metaphoric, that replaces, I say it tastes dusty and long traveled because I'm thinking about how far away the eucalyptus is from its home in Australia, and how I'm thinking about how the farmers around where I live in Sebastopol use the eucalyptus trees as windbreaks. So I'm trying to think of a deeper meaning when I write my sensory details. So you try doing this with another thing. I don't want you guys writing about eucalyptus trees. Write about something entirely different. Okay, density and doubleness. When a word, image, or idea has more than one meaning, it raises the intensity of feeling suggested by the poem. Denotation is just the basic dictionary definition, the kind that suggests words correspond in a one-to-one fashion with objects and gestures. A table is just a table. Connotation means the more complex range of associations and subtle implications of a word. So what I want you to think about is whenever you use a word in poetry, it's powerful. It is bringing with it the resonance of all the cultural meanings of that word, but also all of your personal experiences of that word, maybe your family's connection to that word. And I want you to try to figure out how to tap into all of that wealth when you are playing with language. So you want to use words that will sound out more than just with one meaning. So let's try it. Think of a word, like a really simple word like lake. I chose the word lake. Look up the definition of the word in the dictionary. Just go to dictionary.com, look it up. Lake means a large body of water surrounded by land. That's its basic definition. Next, think of all the connotations you have about this word. These connotations can be cultural or completely personal, like a memory you have or a story you've heard. A good way to tap into connotations is to do a free write or a timed writing exercise where you write down everything that comes to your mind about the word continuously for 5 minutes. Here's a really short free write, because I ran out of room, about the word lake. Lake, blue, deep, drought, camp, cold, hula pie, water ski, canoe, hike, deep, sunken stones. So when I'm writing about lake, I put the picture to the left here. I'm writing about Lake Tahoe right now because we're going there next weekend. So I'm thinking about, I'm trying to summon all of these ideas about the lake. Had I gone on, I would have tapped into probably ideas of the culture of Lake Tahoe, history of Lake Tahoe. I would have tapped into my family's experiences at Lake Tahoe, my own personal experiences at Lake Tahoe. I would try to pull all that out of that one word so I could understand it. This isn't actual writing. I'm not actually writing a poem. I'm just exploring in order to write a poem. Making greater meaning through figurative language. So the real power tools of poetry are figurative language. That's language that's kind of on steroids. It does more than just sit there. It's making the reader feel. The metaphor assumes a state of comparison between two things without acknowledging the comparison. Here are some examples. My electric muscles shook the crowd. Her hair is seaweed and she is the sea. They have a piggy and a fishy air. The bees shouldering the grass. So your metaphor can work as an adjective. It can work as a verb. It can do all kinds of things. Simile makes a comparison between the two things in the same way that a metaphor does, but with the word like or as inserted. And it's less drastic. The metaphor makes the reader work harder than the simile. His teeth rattled like dice in a box. My head is light as a balloon. I will fall like an ocean on that court. The way a metaphor and a simile is set up is it has two parts to it. The tenor, that's the subject of any comparison. In this case, my uncle is a toad. My uncle is the subject of the comparison. Vehicle carries a host of associations back to that tenor. So the word toad is everything about toad is being referred back to my uncle. So in this case, maybe you think toads are slimy, green, ugly, floppy, squishy, and loud. And when you're writing this, when you're writing a metaphor, you think, okay, well, is that what I want my audience to feel when I say my uncle's a toad? Is that the abstract idea I was going for? When you ask yourself, does the word toad convey the feelings you want to convey about your uncle through all of those associations? Maybe that's not happening. So instead try, my uncle is a snarling stray cat. It's more desperate, right? So really think about when you're choosing which things you want to compare, you want to think about the vehicle that you're using to compare against the tenor. And look, now you have some new vocabulary when you're talking about other people's poems. Tenor and vehicle. More figurative language. Allusions in poetry, it's a reference to a piece of literature or a piece of art. Allusions are often used to summarize broad, complex ideas or emotions in one quick, powerful image. So you could allude to a scene in Hamlet. You could allude to a scene from The Walking Dead. It's a way to connect your poem to a cultural literature or idea. You could allude to a painting you once saw in a gallery. Just know that if your allusions are really hard for people to get, you might want to put some sort of a notation in your poem. Personification is when you give human attributes to a non-human thing. So going back to my eucalyptus tree, if I were to say the eucalyptus tree sways like a dancer in the wind, that is giving it's making the eucalyptus tree seem like a human being, and so it's giving it human attributes. Or the weeping willow, that's just personification in the name, right? The tree is sagging in sadness. That makes us feel like the tree actually feels something, and so we're putting our human attributes on that tree. Speaking of tree, here's two very different poems about a tree that use metaphor and simile. The first one is by Harriet Mullen. Tree. Yes, I'm grounded, like all the little bushes attached to the earth at the ankles. What saves me is my madness, the racket of birds singing loud in my tangled hair. And Young Sycamore by William Carlos Williams. I must tell you, this young tree whose round and firm trunk between the wet pavement and the gutter where water is trickling rises bodily into the air with one undulant thrust, half its height, and then dividing and waning, sending out young branches on all sides. Hung with cocoons, it thins till nothing is left of it but two eccentric knotted twigs bending forward, horn-like at the top. So these two poems they're describing trees, but the way that they're describing them, so specific, so detailed. In the case of William Carlos Williams, he can be talking about something else by writing this way about a young sycamore tree. He could be writing about a young girl that he saw in a desperate situation. There's the idea of making this a symbolic tree. Same thing with Harriet Mullen's tree. It has the ability, because of how personified this tree is, has the ability for standing in for her talking about herself, talking about something else besides just the tree, but the tree is completely personified by her. So for your course dialogue this week, we're going to be doing two things. We're going to be writing, and then we're going to be looking for other people's writing and using our new language, tenor and vehicle, metaphor, simile, allusion, personification, to talk about other people's poems. So you're going to begin with a person, place, or thing, like I did with the tree. Then describe the person, place, or thing by being specific, using sensory-rich images, and by using metaphor and simile. Use all of these tools to try to convey how you feel about this thing without saying exactly how you feel, by using no abstract words and no cliches. If you use abstract words or cliches, you will lose points. Also, I'd like you to, you can also use personification and allusion. After you do that, you're also going to find an example of a specific image in one of the poems found in Anthology of Poems. That's pages 74 to 103. Tell us why you think it's a good example. So find the best sensory-rich image or metaphor or simile, and then explain to us what it's doing and why you think it's a good example. After you post your own response of at least 200 words, which is due by Friday, please respond to at least 3 of your classmates' posts, and it's due Sunday at 11:59 p.m. Don't forget, when you're writing in the discussion forum, begin with a salutation, like "Dear class," and then end by signing your name. This counts even when you're responding to your peers' posts. It's a way to keep the conversation clear, so please make sure you do so going forward. Poetry is memorable speech. Poetry is meant to be read aloud in a human voice, and it's meant to be remembered. Sound is inseparable from meaning. Formal poetry is poetry written in a form, in a set form that everyone uses. So, for example, tiger, tiger, burning bright, in the forest of the night, what immortal hand or eye dare frame thy fearful symmetry? This is a poem that's written in meter, and it has the sound of the poem is deeply connected to the meaning of the poem. Free verse is poetry written without meter, and that's the main thing that we're going to be writing this semester. When you do, I am offering a poetry class in the fall that's just about poetry, and we will be going deeply into sound work in poetry in that class. There's a couple of other things that I want you to think about when you're writing with sound in your poetry this week. Alliteration is a repetition of an initial consonant. I've got a stubborn goose whose guts honeycombed with golden eggs, yet won't lay one. So, got, goose, guts, golden. Those are all an initial consonant that's repeated throughout this line. And when you do that, it ties the words together. Assonance is a repetition of a vowel sound between consonants that may or may not match. At the retreat, Lee wasn't allowed to speak or read for 10 days. So we've got retreat, Lee, speak, and read that all connect those words together. Consonance is a repetition of the consonant that concludes a word or symbol. We say a heart breaks like a stick, maybe. Breaks and stick. Blend those two words together. Again, sound makes poems flow and stick together. Internal rhyme is when a poem rhymes inside the line or between the lines. Do not use end rhymes when you're writing your poems for this class. It is a very fine art to use rhyme correctly, and we will be working on that in the fall in our poetry class. But for the sake of this semester, please do not use end rhymes. Working with form. So the first form we're gonna talk about is the sonnet. The sonnet is 14 lines long. It has 10 syllables per line. At the end, there's always a turn. There's a volta. It's a place where you light up the room from a different angle so that we really see it in a different way. Shakespeare wrote a lot of sonnets, and he always used the following rhyme scheme, even though we're not using rhyme scheme for ours. He used the end rhymes were A, the first line, rhymes with B, the second line. Third line, A, rhymes with the first line. Fourth line rhymes with the second line, and so forth. C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, with a rhyming couplet at the end. Petrarchian, written by Petrarch, who wrote hundreds and hundreds of sonnets for his long-lost love, Lara, wrote A, B, B, A, B, B, A, C, D, E, C, D, E. And the modern sonnet, which is what we're going to be working on, has no set rhyme scheme. So some examples, and we're going to talk about one or two of these. My personal recollections of not being asked to the prom, which we talked about last week, by Gail White on page 20. That is a sonnet. There's Atlantis, by a lost sonnet by Yvonne Bolan. That is a American sonnet. It doesn't have a set rhyme scheme. It doesn't actually follow the rules of 14 lines, 10 syllables per line, but it's still a sonnet. The sonnet by William Shakespeare, found on pages 53 through 54. The sonnet 6 by Rilke, and the broken sonnet by John Yao. Wait, I thought I had my sonnets in here. Okay, one second. So we will go to the sonnet by Shakespeare on page 53 to 54 in your book. So I'm going to read it aloud, and then I'll talk about it briefly. So this is where Shakespeare claims that his beloved, even after death will remain alive in his verse. Devouring time, blunt thou the lion's paws, and make the earth devour her own sweet brood. Pluck the keen teeth from the fierce tiger's jaws, and burn the long-lived phoenix in her blood. Make glad and sorry seasons as thou fleest, and do whatever thou wilt, swift-footed time, to the wide world and all her fading sweets. But I forbid thee one most heinous crime. O carve not with thine hours my love's fair brow, nor draw no lines there with thine antique pen. Him in thy course untainted do allow for beauty's pattern to succeeding men. Yet do thy worst old time, despite thy wrong, my love shall in my verse ever live young. So this poem is a sonnet. You can see the rhyme scheme is just like I showed you to the left. A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, G. And the entire sonnet is about one idea. So the whole thing is about begging time to not age his love. But in the end, he turns it and says, well, even if you do, I got this, because I will write a sonnet, which he's done, about my love and keep her young. So that forever, even hundreds of years later, when we're reading it, there will be a poem that talks about how beautiful and young she was. So that's your example for the sonnet. But I want you to go and read Broken Sonnet by John Yao, Sonnet 6 by Rilke. The URLs are here in this lecture, and I want you to go look at them. And Atlantis, Lost Sonnet by Yvonne Bolan. You can also look at Gail White's poem on page 20, where she does use end rhymes, but they're super subtle, so you can't tell. Like unpopularity, dead. So unpopularity and rarity are rhymed. Dead and red are rhymed. Pity and pretty are rhymed. Then and men are rhymed. But you'll see also in Gail White's poem, the whole poem is about one idea, and then it's turned on its head, in the last line where she says, "But I got married, mother, all the same." So you are going to try your own sonnet. I want you to try to make it 14 lines long and 10 syllables per line. Give it a specific setting. Use at least one simile and one metaphor, and make sure you turn toward the end. So you want to give the reader some sort of jump or aha moment. So make it different, that last line or the last 2 lines or even the last 3 lines. It doesn't matter. Make it the last part of the poem. Next thing I want you to do is to write a prose poem. This is just a poem written in prose that makes use of every poetic device that one can find in poetry, with the exception of the line break. We're going to look at 4 examples today. I'm just going to read them to you and tell you a little bit about how to try them out. I suggest you try all of these types out, but if you're limited in time, you only are required to do one of them. And if you are into a 1 and you've done this exercise before, you want to try the one you haven't yet tried. Here's a prose poem called A Story About the Body by the poet Robert Haas. The young composer, working that summer at an artist colony, had watched her for a week. She was Japanese, a painter, almost 60, and he thought he was in love with her. He loved her work, and her work was like the way she moved her body, used her hands, looked at him directly when she made amused and considered answers to when she was amused and considered answers to his questions. One night, walking back from a concert, they came to her door, and she turned to him and said, "I think you would like to have me. I would like that too, but I must tell you that I've had a double mastectomy." And when he didn't understand, "I've lost both my breasts." The radiance that he had carried around in his belly and chest cavity, like music, withered very quickly, and he made himself look at her when he said, "I'm sorry, I don't think I could." He walked back to his own cabin through the pines, and in the morning he found a small blue bowl on the porch outside his door. It looked to be full of rose petals, but he found when he picked it up that the rose petals were on top. The rest of the bowl, she must have swept them from the corners of her studio, was full of dead bees. So, in this first example, the story is told like a parable. I want you to think about how Robert Haas tells the story of the man at the writer's colony and the woman with a double mastectomy without using abstract words. There's another example that we're going to go back to. So another example of this type of poem is The Colonel by Caroline Forche. What you have heard is true. I was in his house. His wife carried a tray of coffee and sugar. His daughter filed her nails. His son went out for the night. There were daily papers, pet dogs, a pistol on the cushion beside me. The moon swung bare on its black cord over the house. On the television was a cop show. It was in English. Broken bottles were embedded in the walls around the house to scoop the kneecaps from a man's legs or cut his hands to lace. On the windows there were gratings like those in liquor stores. We had dinner, rack of lamb, good wine, a gold bell was on the table for calling the maid. The maid brought green mangoes, salt, a type of bread. I was asked how I enjoyed the country. There was a brief commercial in Spanish. His wife took everything away. There was some talk then of how difficult it had become to govern. The parrot said hello on the terrace. The colonel told it to shut up and pushed himself from the table. My friend said to me with his eyes, "Say nothing." The colonel returned with a sack used to bring groceries home. He spilled many human ears on the table. They were like dried peach halves. There was no other way to say this. He took one of them in his hands, shook it in our faces, dropped it in a water glass. It came alive there. "I am tired of fooling around," he said. As for the rights of anyone, tell your people they can go fuck themselves. He swept the ears to the floor with his arms and held the last of his wine in the air. Something for your poetry, no? He said. Some of the ears on the floor caught this scrap of voice. Some of the ears on the floor were pressed to the ground. So how does Forshey tell the story of the Colonel without using abstract words? And what role does the final image play in each of these two poems? I want you to try this one. If you're trying this form out, I'd like you to write a loaded story where instead of providing an ending, you end with a really sensory, rich image. All right. Another way to write a prose poem is by using anaphora, where you repeat something at the beginning of the line over and over again. This is from a book-length poem that's amazing called I Remember by Joe Brainerd. I remember when I thought that if you did anything bad, policemen would put you in jail. I remember one very cold and black night on the beach alone with Frank O'Hara. He ran into the ocean naked and it scared me to death. I remember lightning. I remember wild red poppies in Italy. I remember selling blood every 3 months on 2nd Avenue. I remember a boy I once made love with, and after it was all over, he asked me if I believe in God. I remember when I thought anything old was very valuable. I remember Black Beauty. I remember when I thought that Betty Grable was beautiful. I remember when I thought I was a great artist. I remember when I wanted to be rich and famous, and I still do. How does Brainerd's use of anaphora create a mood and pace in his poem? I'd like you to write the words I remember at the left-hand side of your page and write continuously, repeating the phrase I remember at the beginning of each line and letting yourself go all over the place. I'd like you to do that for at least 2 pages worth of I remember, and then find a page of it that you want to pull together into your free writing exercise. The last one I want to read to you is called Clouds by Russell Edson. A husband and a wife climbed the roof to their house, and at each extreme of the ridge stood facing the other, there's a typo. A husband and wife climbed the roof to their house, and at each extreme of the ridge stood facing the other, while the clouds took to form and reform. The husband said, "Shall we do backward dives, and into windows floating come kissing in a central room?" "I am standing on the bottom of an overturned boat," said the wife. The husband said, "Shall I somersault along the ridge of the roof and up your legs and through your dress out of your neck of your dress to kiss you?" "I am a roof statue on a temple in an archaeologist's dream," said the wife. The husband said, "Let us go now and do what it is to make another come into the world." "Look," said the wife, "the eternal clouds." So this is writing the absurd. This is like an absurd parable in order to speak the unspeakable. How does Edson depict a relationship between a man and a wife? What is absurd about the situation? How does the absurdity affect the poem? What truths do you think he is talking about? I'd like you to write an absurd parable about 2 lovers, or a mother and a daughter, or 2 friends. I'd like you to place the friends or people in somewhere that they shouldn't be and have them speak together in images that convey emotion. Make them not connect, like these 2 speakers are not connecting, like they're speaking 2 different languages against each other. Then from all of these, I'd like you to use one of the starters we worked on in class right here to write a prose poem that is at least 10 sentences long. You must use figures of speech and sound throughout your poem. Use specific language and no abstract words. Remember to include metaphor and our similes, repetition, alliteration, assonance, consonants, and internal rhyme. The last form you're going to be trying this week is called the pantoum. The pantoum has a curious history. It's a Malay song form, and it's adapted by French poets in the 19th century. one of the most obscure fruits of the age of imperialism, and it came into English from the poets who imitated the French. The pantoum has a 4-line stanza. The second and fourth lines of each stanza become the first and third lines of the next stanza. There's 3 examples that I have for you. Fortune's Pantoum by Jane Shore, Pantoum of the Great Depression by Donald Justice, and my own poem, The Dress, which will be listed here. So let's start with Fortune's Pantoum by Jane Shore. What Jane did in this poem, she actually found a bunch of fortunes from cookies and used these as a way to tell a different story. So there's only a couple of original lines in this poem, so mainly it's a found poem. And by found poem, I mean it's a poem that uses words that she found somewhere else. You will go on a long journey. You will have a happy and healthy life. You will recover valuables through thought lost. You will marry and have many children. You will have a happy and healthy life. Your sweetheart will always be faithful. You will marry and have many children. You will have many friends when you need them. Your sweetheart will always be faithful. Soon you will come into a large inheritance. You will have many friends when you need them. You will succeed in your line of work. Soon you will come into a large inheritance. You will travel to many new places. You will succeed in your line of work. Be suspicious of well-meaning strangers. You will travel to many new places. A message from a distance is soon to be received. Be suspicious of well-meaning strangers. Important news from an unexpected source. A message from a distance is soon to be received. You will meet a dark and handsome foreigner. Important news from an unexpected source. Do not take unnecessary chances. You will meet a dark and handsome foreigner. You will have a fear of visiting high places. Do not take unnecessary chances. Your misunderstanding will be cleared up in time. You have a fear of visiting high places. Grasp at the shadow and lose the substance. Your understanding will be cleared up in time. Sometimes you worry too much about death. Grasp at the shadow and lose the substance. You will recover valuables through thought lost. Sometimes you worry too much about death. You will go on a long journey. You'll see how the lines from the first stanza, the lines that weren't yet used in the second stanza, are used in the last stanza. Just a reminder, when I say the word stanza, I'm talking about the lines grouped together in a poem. This is Pantoum of the Great Depression by Donald Justice. Our lives avoided tragedy simply by going on, without end and with little apparent meaning. Oh, there were storms and small catastrophes. Simply by going on we managed. No need for the heroic. Oh, there were storms and small catastrophes. I don't remember all the particulars. We managed. No need for the heroic. There were the usual celebrations, the usual sorrows. I don't remember all the particulars. Across the fence, the neighbors were our chorus. There were the usual celebrations, the usual sorrows. Thank God no one said anything in verse. The neighbors were our only chorus, and if we suffered, we kept quiet about it. And at no time did anyone say anything in verse. It was the ordinary pities and fears consumed us, and if we suffered, we kept quiet about it. No audience would ever know our story. It was the ordinary pities and fears consumed us. We gathered on porches, the moon rose, we were poor. What audience would ever know our story? Beyond our windows shone the actual world. We gathered on porches, the moon rose, we were poor, and time went by, drawn by slow horses. Somewhere beyond our windows shone the world. The Great Depression had entered our souls like fog. And time went by, drawn by slow horses. We did not ourselves know what the end was. The Great Depression had entered our souls like fog. We had our flaws, perhaps a few private virtues, but we did not ourselves know what the end was. People like us simply go on. We have our flaws, perhaps a few private virtues, but it is by blind chance only that we escape tragedy, and there is no plot in that. It is devoid of poetry. You'll see how in this poem, in this pantoum, the lines are repeated, but they change as they're repeated, and that's totally okay in a pantoum. And finally, here's my pantoum called The Dress. The lemon yellow dress hangs in the room that curves like a nautilus. He says, I've made this dress for you. Paris, green folding chairs, freckling the weave of tan gravel paths. Time has rolled us around to this moment. Curving like a nautilus, he says, I've made this dress for you. She stands like Aphrodite, naked in the open room. Time has rolled us around to this moment, the dress falling over her body like light or air. She stands like Aphrodite, naked in the open room. Sky darkens as we heave up the slope to Stein's grave, dress falling over her body like light or air. The Polaroid speaks of contrast. Sky darkens as we heave up the slope toward Stein's grave. You can see the joy rising like the text of a lost manuscript in the Polaroid that speaks of contrast. Later, we will leave questions like stones. You can see the joy rising like the text of a lost manuscript. After, the wind will carry us like seeds, where we will sift through a pile of stones and bloom into bright sycamores. I must have been carried by the wind to have landed so far away here, planted yet still blooming, a bright scarred sycamore, but you remain there, unattested as joy. Paris, green folding chairs, freckling the weave of tan gravel paths, the nautilus still turns between us, and always at its center stands the lemon yellow dress. So for your writing exercise, I'd like you to write a pantoum. I'd like you to really try to use the form where you're going to repeat lines 2 and 4 as lines 1 and 3 between stanza 1 and 2, and then complete that pattern all the way through the end and bring the first lines 1 and 3 as the last 2 and 4 lines in your final poem. So the poem will all come together in the end. You can change those lines as you repeat them. Try to use a subject that you want to meditate on in that way, that you want to bring something to by looking at it. Maybe by doing something that is that's a memory that you're sorting through, or a really complex event in time like the Great Depression, or something you've done. Maybe you had to. A student from last semester wrote about dancing, ballet dancing, and growing up as a ballet dancer, and in order to reveal truths about this thing. All right, those are your writing exercises this week. After you complete your writing exercises, I want you to go back and look at the poem that you created. It is not completed, okay? Remember, this whole class is about learning how to go back to your work and make it better. So I want you to look at, you can use this checklist. I went over it last week as well as a way to look at your poem. Always title your poem. Always spell check your poem. Always make sure that you look at it line by line. Make sure the words are the best words that they can be. The images are as sensory rich as they can be. Look at your line breaks. Make sure they're working. Look at the sound of the poem. Are you using alliteration? Are using the very best words that you can use. You can always, if you're stuck, send me an email of your poem, like I said in my announcement last week. Please do so knowing that it takes me about 24 hours to respond to your poem, and I will not be able to get email. I won't be able to respond really fast on Thursday or Friday this week. So please try to keep that in mind, and I will remind you when I will be off email. So your second formal assignment is you're going to type up one of those writing assignments that you did and make it the best poem that it can be. You'll type it up in a Word doc. You'll make sure there's no grammar. You'll make sure it's titled. It's the best that it can be, and then you'll submit it in the assignment. Those of you in English 201, you're going to share an additional you're going to share your formal assignment, one of your formal assignments with each other in a little workshop format. This is only for English 201. People in English 201, please post your poem in this week's English 201 discussion forum, and you'll need to post it by Friday at 11:59 p.m. So you'll need to complete your poem early. And then if you can post, you're going to post your poem, some information about it. And then if you can post an audio file of you reading your poem, that would be great. But I'm not sure. Probably you all know how to do this very easily. So I'm assuming that everyone's technology skills are better than mine in this class. If you can post that so that people can hear you read your poem, that would be great. Don't say anything bad about your poem. You're not allowed to, because remember, everything you write is awesome. You have to feel good about yourself. And then I'd like you to respond to your peers in a way that helps them make their poems even better. So really respond to them and try to help them, just like we do in workshop, try to give them ideas on how to improve their poem. So remember, you're using this as a way to improve your poem. Don't feel defensive if someone gives you feedback on your poem, because the idea is they're trying to help you make it better. That's it for this week, and that will be it for poetry. So really pour your heart into this week of poetry. We will be moving on to creative nonfiction next week. I'll see you guys on